Hi everyone, this is again another session of TechTalk Dudes, where Pim and myself talking about various topics, various from identity to security. And today we are talking about lifecycle management of guest accounts. And Pim is talking about what it entails and also what options we have with the controlling the life cycle of our guest accounts. And guest accounts it's becoming more and more normal because organizations are easily able to cooperate, and also with new announcements like Teams, shared channels, for example. Those are new examples and capabilities of how easy it is to work each other with all the organizations. So Pim, you know a lot of lifecycle management, particularly when it comes to guest accounts. Just wondering, what is important to address lifecycle management for guest accounts?
Yeah, thanks for the swift intro, Ronnie. So the lifecycle management for guest accounts, it's mainly important because you basically the source of the account is sourced from the home tenant, and there is a reference object is created in the tenant from which you share something with the guest. So security-wise, and talking about from an identity lifecycle perspective, it's first of all important, and we will go through that in a minute, to configure your global tenant settings in the right way, which varies from the Azure AD settings itself, settings within SharePoint Online, because you can work in teams that will create a guest account, but by default, if you share something in SharePoint Online, it won't create a guest account. It will create a SharePoint Online guest account, which is something completely different from Azure AD. And of course, you can then apply conditional access to it for example, multi-factor authentication, or eventually other security ways to control it via Defender for Cloud Apps.
Yeah.
So that's basically the first thing. And then secondly, we're going to look at how can we then apply lifecycle management on those accounts. So how can we make sure that they're deleted when they're not used anymore, or when they lose access, and what are the ways to do that today. What I can do is I will share the screen.
When you in your introduction you mentioned about first make sure that some basic settings are configured properly. From what I understood myself, there are multiple entries or multiple portals where you can configure guest accounts and settings. So it might be also confusing. So perhaps it's good to show us what are the real settings or the important settings which you should definitely cover.
Yeah. So I will first start with the external identity settings within Azure Active Directory. That's right here. You can see the screen, right, Ronnie?
Yeah.
And in here you will find external collaboration settings. So those are the ones which are important in terms of sharing. Who can share what within your organization? What will be their permissions? And is there any restriction applied to it? So that's the first step, basically, to do this. Well, you can read my blog, because I explain each setting in individually, so it's a bit massive to go over that right now in one go. And then secondly, what is important is, because they changed the one-time passcode recently, so that is enabled by default unless you have selected differently. It's quite important actually to enable it within your organization. I will go over that in a second. If you hit all identity providers, you can see Azure AD, Active Directory, Microsoft account, and email one-time passcode are configured by default. However, if you've selected disable previously on the email one-time passcode, it's advisable to enable this. And why is that? if you want, so for Teams, it's less relevant because most of the times you already have a Microsoft account and you're already working. But imagine that you have a personal account like I have, which I'm not using by the way anymore, but my at-home account, which is from the Ziggo provider in the Netherlands. That has a mailbox, but that account is not a Microsoft account, a live account. But let's say someone shares a file for me from SharePoint Online. I log in. He shares it with me with my at-home account. I log in and I use the email one-time passcode. It's all going via that same email, and that same email may or may not be protected with MFA. We simply don't know. Now, to make sure that SharePoint Online inherits the settings from Azure AD B2B, which we can enable via one simple PowerShell command for SharePoint Online, which is called enable Azure AD B2B integration. Make sure that it's set to true. So you need to connect to the SharePoint Online PowerShell. Apologies. You need to connect to the SharePoint Online PowerShell module, and you can then enable this for your tenant, set it to true. And once you set it to true, it'll also say, make sure to also enable the one-time passcode authentication. If it's not enabled, then SharePoint will not use the Azure AD B2B, even if it's enabled. So it's important that both of the settings are configured in the same way. So that's at that point in time, once the user which you have shared a document with previously, or you share a new document or folder within SharePoint Online or within a Teams folder actually, because there is no need to share the whole Teams. It will create a guest account for the user, and then it becomes helpful. That becomes quite helpful when applying, for example, access reviews within identity governance, which we will show you in a minute, and applying additional security rights, for example, in conditional access. So if you look at, for example, this policy, that's my guest conditional access policy, wherein I have selected all guest and external users. And if you're going to hit over the I sign within this setting, it also says includes Azure AD B2B guests, but not SharePoint guests. And that's the thing which we just have fixed.
Yeah, so actually what you're now ensuring, you make sure that Office 365, whether it's personal or an enterprise account, those guest accounts are able to access and utilize your resources based on your terms. So you can apply MFA, strong authentication, and for those which are coming with a personal one, you can also provide the same level of security-wise. Without the hassle and all the things which is coming from the guest user.
Exactly, and without even the need of having a Microsoft account, because it basically creates a Microsoft guest account for you. So the behavior would be not signing in with a username and password, but the behavior would be signing in with your email address. You will get an OTP, one-time passcode sent over to your email. You type it in, and then you do multi-factor authentication, which is sourced from, in this case, this tenant. That's multi-factor because it's not something it's not only the email, but also an SMS, a phone call, or preferably, of course, the Authenticator app.
So now we have the fundamentals of the guest configuration in place, and the guest users are now welcome to your tenant based on your security controls. What is actually the next step? Because now they are in your tenant. How do you keep up with them? How do you make sure that they are they are still active in your organization, or they're not being used anymore? How do you keep track on that administrative overhead, I would say?
Yeah. So there are a few options in here, and you need to determine. Of course, preferably we would like to see that you would have a Azure AD Premium P2 license available within your tenant. But as I just mentioned, there are a few options to do that, and I will quickly go over them one by one. The first one, which I will show you, is how to do automatic provisioning of guest users within your tenant, and deprovisioning as well. by the use of access packages. And it's fairly easy. If you create an access package in here, so for example, the Microsoft Teams Project X, it doesn't have any kind of information in it, so I'm happy to show you.
And an access package, that's actually a kind of a context package which includes the sources the guest user is able to access, right?
Yeah, but yeah, basically we are creating a flow for a user to request access to either a single or a set of resources. That's something you can determine on your own. In this case, it's a simple Microsoft Teams environment. And I will open it up. I will open the access request up via users which are not in my directory. And then I can pick, okay, open it up for everyone, open it up for only the all the configured connected organizations or specific connected organizations. And
for B2B, right?
For B2B, indeed, yeah. So a connected organization is always referring to B2B, not your own organization, because that would mean that you need to select a setting for users in your directory. Now, let's say the user doesn't exist yet, the guest user doesn't exist yet in your tenant. The user is requesting this app. You can put an approval on it. I will not go into the details because otherwise this will take hours. The user, the access request is approved by the approver, and the user gets access. Then it means the guest account will be instantly provisioned within your tenant because it's required, it's approved. So I will provision the user. And that's great because at that point in time, we can, the guest user can access the resources. But yeah, most likely with guest users, it's most likely temporary, not in all cases, of course. So would that be needed? Would that eventually be needed? So it's helpful as well to put in on the access package an access review or an expiry date as well. So where we can say, and this is a ridiculous setting because this is a test, expire the access of this package after X days, but allow the user to extend the access. And in this case, an approval is again required to extend the access. And as long as the user keeps his access, that guest account will still be active in the tenant. But let's say the guest user leaves the organization where he is working for, so that guest account in the source in the home tenant becomes inactive, and in a resource tenant it will stay active. Well, then the review to extend access is sent over. No one responds to it, and basically the user loses access to this access package. Now, if that was, and then I go to the settings, if that was the last access package, if the user was provisioned via the access packages and it was the last access package the user had on his account, we can say, let's block the user. And that's something what it will do instantly, and it will remove the user after X days. And in this case, for testing purposes, I've configured 1, of course, but you can put in, for example, after a month or so. And at that point in time, that process, the process of automatic provisioning and deprovisioning is configured in a controllable manner. However, the thing, and then I'm going directly to the second point, of course. However, the thing most likely is not each resource yet, which you have in an access package, of not each resource which there is, can be put into an access package. Yeah. So we need to find alternate ways on how we can put lifecycle management on, because if something is shared via SharePoint Online, the user is not provisioned as a B2B user via an access package, because
so you can't keep track on it.
No, it was a user action, or let's say someone in some group owner, a group Microsoft Teams group owner adds a guest user to one of their groups. Then what? Because again, that user was not gained not as access via an access package, so it was provisioned differently. So for that, you basically have 2 options, and the first one is something I've put into Azure Automation, and it's basically a simple PowerShell script. Or well, I find it simple. Maybe others do find it complex. But what it does, it simply connects to the Graph API with only the permissions to, of course, to read accounts and eventually delete them. And what it is doing, it's simply going over, it retrieves all the guest users. I will not go into detail. And for each guest user, it will check if the user is still a member of a group. So let's say the user sits within a tenant but doesn't belong to any kind of groups. Then, only then, I'm going to do something. And that something is simply either we are going to, if the user doesn't belong to any groups, either we will check for the last sign-in date. And if the last sign-in date then is greater than, I think it's stated right here. If the sign-in date is older than 150 days, but not more than 169, it will disable the account. If the day is inactive, so the last sign-in date is more than half a year ago, only then it will delete the account. And the script will report at the end X disabled user accounts, X deleted user accounts, and X active accounts, because they still belong to a group or for whatever reason they will stay there. So this is the process which I created myself, just as a demo on how you can tweak this on you can tweak the script on your own. Of course, you can put in some extra variables or extra checks if you do want to. But this is a great start on cleaning up and disabling and cleaning up those accounts which won't be hit via the identity lifecycle management process as an access package. And this is tunable. You can configure this in any kind of way you want, of course, because it's scripting.
It's very, very flexible, I would say.
Yeah, and then at last there is a third option, and the third option is a bit more convenient but less flexible than this. It looks like it. It looks very much like it, actually, but it's less tweakable. So, and that is using an access review. And I hope we all know access reviews. So I will quickly go to the interface. If we go to identity governance, we can go to access reviews, and here you can basically create your own access review. And that's simply by clicking new access review and selecting things in here and putting decisions behind it. Now, what we now can do is, and this is a new feature, and it's really great. What we now can do is create a dynamic group which contains all guests, or maybe contains all guests which you want to target with a specific access review. You can, of course, use a lot of queries based on dynamic groups, but it's something you can determine yourself, and that's the flexibility. That's basically the only flexibility. And then when creating the review, and I need to show this in Word, unfortunately, right now. Instead of that, we were just able to select teams and groups. We select the dynamic group and we say guest users. There are now two extra options available, which says inactive users on tenant level only, which we can set to true. And then we can determine when they were inactive. So for how long are those users inactive? 60, 180. Basically the same as I just showed you
in the script.
Yeah. And then at that point in time, later on within the access review, and I will just quickly go over something. I can say either the user does the self-review or the group owner does a review. Most likely you would do self-review in this case. You can determine the recurrence. So I will quick and dirty configure this quarterly. It ends never. Quite helpful for this. And then we can say action to apply and deny guests, block the user from signing in for 30 days, and then remove it from the tenant. Basically, we know the account was inactive. It wasn't used for the days you have configured. let's block the account for 30 days. And after those 30 days, just wipe it from the tenant. And at that point in time, it doesn't really mind if someone creates a user within Teams, because this policy will make sure the access review itself, if the user doesn't respond to it, you can say remove access, which means clean up the account. Or you can say auto apply the results to the, and you need to check auto apply results to the source, of course. It means basically remove the account if the user doesn't respond to the access review. So if the user determines, in this case, it's the server view, I don't need the access anymore, or I ignore the message because I don't need it anymore, he will or she will be cleaned up automatically. It's quite helpful.
It's quite interesting, Pim, and just wondering, you are mentioning now three to summarize the lifecycle through identity governance by an access package, by scripting, which is very powerful and flexible, and the third one, which is in preview by access reviews. When comparing between access reviews and access packages, I think with the last one, it provides more and more flexibility, because with access packages, you need to configure resources and all those dependencies. So what would be your preference then in that case?
Yeah, so for this is a very good question. So for the identity, the guest lifecycle management, I would advise you to go and use these kinds of access reviews, which are now available. If they are not fit for purpose, so if you want something to be tweaked in here, yeah, well, you're tied to the script, and then I would say use a script. You can use my script, and there are enough other examples. If you Google the right thing on the internet, you will find them, of course. But that gives you a great start, and you can tweak that based on your needs, of course. And from my point of view, access packages are great, but that's more like a self-service option, so that the guest user doesn't have to reach out to the end user. Can you please add me to this team? Because the guest user is able to request it themselves by just simply going to myaccess.microsoft.com. And then the lacking feature is that you still need to type in the tenant destination name after the URL, because otherwise you don't know the tenant, you're not a guest in the tenant, so you cannot switch organizations yet. But by typing in the full myaccess.microsoft.com/tenant name URL, you get into the tenant of where you can request those access packages.
Okay, well, Pim, I think this is a great overview of what options you do have with lifecycle management for guest accounts. So thank you very much for explaining those capabilities, as well as the importance of getting the fundamentals right in place. So that's also something which we shouldn't forget. And the scripting is available. Can we download it? Is it on GitHub or?
Yeah, it's on my GitHub. It's github.com/identityman, if I'm not mistaken.
Otherwise we will provide the link afterwards.
Yeah, you will find the link in the comments, or in the description of the video.
Okay, well, awesome. Well, thanks, Pim, for sharing your insights on identity governance, in particular for guest accounts. And I would say thank you for listening and watching this TechTalk Dudes episode, and looking forward to a next one.
Yeah, same counts for me, Ronnie. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.